Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Adult Improver series of Perpetual Chess. I am excited to speak with our accomplished guest in a moment. First, wanted to give a thanks to Patreon subs of Perpetual Chess. We've been doing more Zoom hangouts lately. As I record this on September 9th, a few days back, we had a little Zoom watch party as the Magnus Hans match went down. That turned out to be kind of anticlimactic, but still, we've been getting people together and talking chess. And one of the perks that you can enjoy as a Patreon member. I wanted to thank recent Patreon subs, Chris Lott and Scott Middleman, among the many others. Also, of course, wanted to give thanks to our longtime sponsor, Chessable.com. I'll flog my course one more time, Identifying Critical Moments in Chess. So far, the feedback's been good. You can check it out and hit me up if you have any questions about it. But also, former U.S. champion Sam Shanklin has a new course out. So those of you who've been listening for a long time know that there's this famous, what Grandmaster Jakob Algar calls the Sam Shanklin rule, which is if you want to play a move and it seems like it's not working, Shanklin posed the question, what if I do it anyway? And that's what this actual course is about. So I'm excited to check it out. And obviously, Sam's stuff is always great among the many other Chessable courses that you can check out. Now, as for our guest this week, he's someone whose blog I've been reading for 6 months or so now. And it's an incredible blog, so detailed. Lots of actionable chess improvement advice. And he's got kind of an interesting story as well. So he's one of these people that played tournaments for a while in his younger years and then stopped in 2004 and came back during the pandemic. He'll tell the story in more detail. But when he came back, he had a 2140 rating and decided he wanted to make USCF Master. As we know, even gaining 60 points, especially at that level in the current tournament climate, is not easy. So he had to revamp his game entirely. It took him 2.5 years, but he made it. And you can read all about it on his blog, which is called Movelibrary. Away from the board, he is chief data scientist at Blue Ocean AI, a company that he co-founded. And he lives not too far from me in Pennsylvania, although we haven't met personally. And I am excited to welcome to the program National Master, Matt Gross. Welcome, Matt.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, excited to chat. So you go through your sort of chess origin story on your blog. Again, I mean, it could be not only a book, but a good book because it tells your story and just has so much information. But for the purposes of our conversation, I think the best place to start might be your comeback. So 2021, you haven't played since 2024. I mean 2004, at least in tournaments. What re-sparked your interest in chess?
Yeah, so it was interesting, and it was actually like end of 2020. So it was like the pandemic had been going on for 6 months, kind of stuck inside. And personally, I'd moved across the country. We moved across the country I was from California originally, and for most of my life, and then moved to Pennsylvania, which is where my wife's family is from. And it was a lot of restarting stuff, and then the pandemic hit, and we were just inside all the time. Didn't really know anybody, just hanging out, the two of us, occasionally seeing her parents who were aging, and there was just a lot of change and a lot of loss, and so I started just I was inside a lot, and I started watching Gadakomsky's Twitch stream, and that was just randomly, I didn't even know Twitch was a thing. But then, on the Lee Chess, they have the streamers on the left. And so I said, oh, Gadakomsky, let me see what this is about. So I started watching it, and it was interesting. Komsky was a really good player and played a completely different style than what I was used to. I was playing gambits, sacrificing pieces, and didn't know much about endgames or positional play or anything. But he was very positionally oriented, a lot of good endgames, great endgames. And so it was interesting. I was watching it, I was enjoying it, and I started to, after enough time, I started to pick up on, because I didn't know what to do in any of these positions, but he did, and over again, watching sort of like what he would play and what he would consider and talk about. I was like, okay, I kind of get the idea of what you're supposed to do in this position, and so I would kind of guess, always trying to guess what he would play, and occasionally I started to get better at it. And he had us play in these like arenas, so I actually joined I started following him and sponsored him. And he started having us play in arenas and simuls and stuff. And especially the arenas, like he would pick openings that he thought were important, none of which I knew anything about. Because I was, again, like King's Gambit, Elephant Gambit,
wow.
like, all this junk. And he was having us play like the Rui Lopez and like the Queen's Gambit Declined and things like that. And so I started, I'll learn a little bit about it and like try to play in this thing. And I did, like, I was like, I learned about the Queen's Gambit Decline, and I played it through some games and like figured out what you're supposed to do. And then randomly I got, like, just playing on Lichess, like matched up against an IM, and I was like, why don't I just try Queen's Gambit Decline? Let's just see how this goes. And I won the game. And I was like, well, wait, like, this is, I could learn and improve. Like, I'd given up on playing. I stopped playing when I was 29, stopped playing tournament chess. And now I was, 45. And that was something that I used to do. It wasn't something that I was going to do again. And I was like, all these things are like slow decline. Like, my parents had passed away, and like I was spending most of our time with my aging, in-laws. And I just wanted there to be something getting better, something good. And I was like, I can do this. Like, I can improve now, like right now. I can improve at this, and I can get something moving the other direction. Like, remember, again, the pandemic, like, it was like everything seemed like it was, the world was falling apart. And I was like, I'm going to do this. And so I was like, no, okay, I'm going to come back and try to do this and try to make Master, which I'd never done. And I started working on it. I was like, well, every journey starts with a single step. I'm going to spend at least some time every day on this. Whatever that is. Like, I have to figure out how to do this. Because again, like playing mostly junk openings 17 years previously. So, and at this point I was like, and mostly I was like out calculating people before. And I was like, I don't think I'm going to be out calculating people now. Like, that isn't going to be the nature of how I'm going to be successful at this age. And so,
let's pause for a minute if we could, because I think that you hit on a few important roadblocks that adults like ourselves, you and I are in our 40s, but even in people as they start to face their 30s, or if they're older, start to grapple with this idea that A, they might struggle with calculation, B, improvement becomes more difficult. So I'm curious, Matt, coming at it like from almost like no exposure to chess, it sounds like, in like almost a 17-year period or whatever it is, like what voices told you that it was going to be more difficult? Why did you know calculation was going to be harder? And
part
stuff
of it
like that
was the reason why I'd stopped in the first place, right? I stopped when I was 29, and I was very aware of the general arc of ratings of strong players, right? Like a lot, Kasparov was retiring at that point, and that wasn't because he wanted to. That was because he was losing to people, and that was normal, right? Like, you'd see strong players and they were like really good, like through their 20s and 30s, but then after their 30s, like, it's rare. Like, it was, people were celebrating Korchnoi, and Smyslov was really good, but they were lauded because they were exceptional.
Right.
And so I was like, when I was 29, I was like, well, do I want to keep doing this, right? I'm probably at my peak strength right now. And, like, just from that information. And I was like, well, and I had other priorities. Like, I started a job I liked and was interested in. And I was like, do I really want to, like, spend the time? And I decided I didn't. I decided at 29, I was like, that's enough. Like, and then, so that didn't change. Like, that opinion didn't change when I stopped playing. And so it was, and that was, again, just based on looking at other people, looking at professional players, looking at really strong players, and looking at when people were, of course, I was playing tournament chess. I knew the ages of the people that I was playing, and I knew who was good, and I knew who had been good and wasn't good anymore, and who was getting better, and the approximate sort of age range based on just that experience. And that's where I got that idea. It was like, and there's part of that that's not accurate, right? Like certainly there are players that buck that trend, but I could see in a general trend that when people what the arc was for someone's life and their strength in chess, and that just became my opinion.
Okay. And then so as you write about on your blog, and we'll link to a few posts so that listeners can sort of, because there's one like TLDR posts that sums up your arc nicely. And you decided that you needed to focus on different things. So you mentioned the dodgy opening repertoire that you used to have. First of all, as I've mentioned before, like I just want to be clear for listeners, like 20 years ago, you could get away with a dodgy repertoire, and you correctly ascertained that it's harder now, especially if you're like trotting them out every single game rather than as a surprise weapon. But in addition to revamping your openings, you focused more on intuition rather than, say, calculation. So what governed that choice?
Yeah, so that was, and there were a few things that went into that. Mostly, the biggest thing was just watching Kamsky and saying, okay, like why? Clearly, Kamsky was a much better player than I was at this point, right? And like, but what was he good at? And he was a better calculator. Like he was absolutely like he was looking deeper in the same positions. I was playing simultaneously against him, and I could see how deeply he was calculating. But mostly, it was he knew what to do. His intuition was really good, right? Looking at a position, and he's not mystified about what to do. He has an idea about what the general struggle should be based on characteristics for the position, and he was, he knew, had a sort of repertoire of ideas that he would deal from. Like, okay, I can do this kind of thing. I can do this kind of thing. These are like maybe 3 or 4 different potential plans from this position based on his experience and knowledge. And then he was figuring out which one works best based on calculation and looking at the specifics of this position. Does this work? That's not a good idea here. But it wasn't a blank slate, right? He had concrete ideas and plans that he had at his disposal that I didn't, right? Like when I was looking at a position, I was like, what am I going to do here? I have no idea. Or like, I think I can do this one thing, which either was wrong or incomplete, right? Like, because there's maybe 3 or 4 other plans that I could have considered. And so I was going back over it and like saying, okay, like, how do I, like, this is the biggest difference, because Kamsky is a slightly older player than I was, right? And so I was like, this is the biggest difference that I see. And the other thing is just the intuition that calculation, if you don't know what to calculate, right? If you're not starting at the right points, or you don't have the right small set of plans that you might employ at your disposal, then calculation doesn't do that much, right? I was a really good calculator when I was younger, and it didn't help at all because in situations where I didn't have a basic idea of what to do. And so that's why I was like, what I really need is that, an intuition, an immediate idea of how to proceed in this position, the kinds of plans that I can employ.
And then in order to work on that, you sort of drilled down or honed in on the idea of model games.
Yeah.
How did you make that choice?
Well, that's because from when I was a kid, and like learning how to, like, I was a very tactical player when I was young and playing junk stuff, but like I really got what strength I got from learning how to attack, and I got that only by looking at games, of strong players, Mikhail Tal and Morphy, and the young games from Capablanca and Alekhine, and Kasparov was hero. Like, anyway, there were all kinds of attacking players, and I didn't just know how to attack. I looked at games, I looked at them play, and I had a class when I was real young where the teacher was all about attacking play, and he would bring in games by strong players that he thought were good attacking games, and we would guess each move. He would say, okay, and then we would talk through sort of why it was good or bad, but the whole thing was playing through the game, seeing moves that worked, seeing plans that worked, that got taught me how to play these kinds of positions. And so it was like, all right, well, how do I just in certain types of positions I knew what to do. How do I broaden that to a broader set of positions? And I was like, okay, well, model games is how I did it before. Makes a lot of sense, right? You're learning anything. You try to see it done well, and you imprint these patterns, and those become the patterns that you have ownership over. In fact, that's why I called the website Movelibrary, is because the idea is this library of ideas and concepts that you develop and increase. And so model games are a great way to do that because you see them working, you see them played well. And originally I was like, okay, I'm going to find games of players that I admire, and I'm going to, play through their games. I'm going to learn their games, and then I'm going to learn their patterns. And that turned out to be a little not as great as I thought it would be. I mean, it's good, but a lot of the players I was trying to emulate were, like Karpov, for example, was an example of somebody who was trying to emulate, but like a lot of his openings were not being played nowadays. And so and also some of the decisions he made weren't ones that I particularly liked, even knowing he was way better than I was like, I'd rather not play that kind of position if I have a choice. So I started working on them myself and customizing. So I make custom model games where I was just making them myself with the benefit of Stockfish, so that they were high level and, like not missing any tactics and things like that. But, plans that I liked and ideas that I liked, and sort of creating these model games that then I could ingest and really learn.
And Matt, on the topic of model games, you mentioned in your blog, you stress, I should say, not only that you study them, but you mentioned memorizing them. What's your approach to memorizing them?
Well, I use Chessable for the most part, making your own personal courses and things like that. The only reason why, so I memorize them because I lose them otherwise. Like I go through stuff. I look at them more in a more cursory fashion. Typically, when the game actually comes, I don't have access to the information, and so by memorizing as many as I can, it keeps the information available. So when I see a position, I know, okay, there are these maybe 3 or 4 games that I know that I could play out like right now, and I know the moves that are made in there, and it's the ideas that are played in there, and that they're similar. Okay, so then it gives me, all right, I have 3 or 4 different ideas of how this might go, and it gives me, again, it's intuition, like plans that will be available. So yeah, Chessable is great. I especially like that mobile app because I can do it anywhere, and it's really pretty good. So yeah, I put in personal courses into Chessable, usually mapping them out in a Lee chess study so I can get them into PGN easily. And then just upload them to Chessable and then go through them. And I think it's great.
Okay. It's reminiscent. So probably 3-4 years ago at this point, I interviewed a guy who, FM Terry Chapman, who's also featured in the great book, Chess for Life by Natasha Regan and Matthew Sadler. And he is now in his 60s. He was in the 50s at the time that Sadler and Regan sort of brought him out into the spotlight. But he also, as an older player, had a very sort of repertoire and understanding focused approach. So I do think there's definitely a logic to it, especially as you get older. And are you doing anything intuition based beyond sort of your opening tabias? Like,
yeah, so yes, quite a bit. I think that because there are lots of positions, rook end games was
right.
one that you can't really. It's really hard to practice through, games that start in the opening and end in the ending, because there just aren't that, you just can't get that many rook end games. But so what I would do there is I would identify, always it's like testing it online, because that's the easy place to go, to just test sort of, do I have an idea of what's going on in this position or not? And then so I'd play games, a lot of games, bullet games, fast games, but a lot of them to accumulate positions where I knew I hadn't been comfortable, where I knew I hadn't really known what to do, or then I looked at afterwards and was like, wow, I was completely wrong in how I was approaching that. So I would just accumulate these positions. So I'd actually take the link of the game that I'd played, and in some rook end games, like list in just a spreadsheet, and just a bunch of links that had games I'd played where had a problem, and then I would go to positions that I specifically knew I didn't do a good job with them, and then I sort of came up with a procedure of sparring against the computer, like where you play the position against Stockfish, and then you reverse and you play the other side against Stockfish, and then you reverse again, and you play it over and over again until you get an idea of what to do, because Stockfish is of course crushing you from both sides, but you can see sort of how it's playing the struggle, and then by playing both sides yourself and getting better, you kind of get an idea. So then I would go through those, call them sparring positions, on some level of regularity, especially when I specifically had a problem, like for example, I played in a tournament game and there was a rook ending where I had screwed it up. Then I would go back to my rook end games and play over them, and maybe add some new positions to practice, and that helped too. And it was a way you could do it. It wasn't just about openings.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense as well. And Matt, we have a question from a Patreon sub that actually kind of pushes back against your idea of training intuition. And we'll get to that in a minute. But first, I wanted to tell you all about a sponsor of Perpetual Chess, the Chess Universe app, which is an app available for both Apple and Android that gives you the ability to play against bots. It has puzzles, it has lessons. You can review the moves of the greats. So it's a lot of fun, and it's free for as long as you want to use it. You can also become a VIP to remove ads and unlock additional features. So as always, I will put a link in the description to this, as well as anything else of note mentioned on the podcast. But be sure to go to an app store and check out Chess Universe. So our hard-hitting question for you, Matt, is from longtime listener, guest, friend of the pod, Han Shu, who also is a national master. And Han, so dig in, because this is a detailed question. He, once I announced that you were coming on the pod, he got intrigued by your blog. And so here is Han's question. So Han writes, in his book, Think Like a Super Grandmaster by Michael Adams, the authors compare the thought processes of players of different strengths for 40 positions. The strengths of the player ranges from unrated to super GMs. They conclude, one, that top GMs base their decisions primarily based on calculation, club players based on intuition. Two, top GMs spend a lot of time falsifying their candidate moves, including opponents' best moves and threats. Three, club players, on the other hand, look for corroboration of their move choices. My belief is that club players must improve their calculation and visualization skills to become masters, but you are the anomaly who significantly improved by focusing on your intuition. Yesterday, this is a couple days ago now, it'll be more than a week by the time you guys hear this, Magnus was commenting on the Nakamura-Niemann match and commented when asked for an evaluation, at a certain moment, general considerations are insufficient, and you must become specific and calculate concrete lines. Can you explain why focusing on intuition was sufficient for you to improve? Which role do the model games play in this? How often are you outcalculated by your opponents? And do you steer the game to more positional positions because of this approach?
Okay, so there's a lot there. I would say that the first thing is that part of this approach was based on my strengths and weaknesses coming into the project. That as when I was a young player, I was a very good calculator, but had not done nearly enough work on understanding plans in a variety of positions, especially slower positions. So part of it was that I knew that was a particular area of weakness, right? That there was a lot of positions where I didn't know what to do at all. And so calculation was irrelevant. So that there is a personal aspect to this, of why I made that decision. But I would say that and it's absolutely true, like that calculation and intuition, you can't be a very strong player without both of these things, right? Like you need to be able to look deeply into the position, concrete aspects of the position. But at the same time, right, you need to have a general idea of the plans and ideas that are appropriate for a given position based on the pawn structure and dynamics of that position, right? What kinds of things are you looking at? If you are, if you have a queen against three minor pieces, what kinds of ideas are going to be like what is the queen good at, right? You need to know that in addition to looking concretely at the elements of the position. So I firmly believe that both of these things are required in order to be a strong player above club level. I do think that, so that's the first thing. I don't want to, but for me, like I knew that the deficit was largely from an intuition perspective. But that said, I would say that that when I've seen, for example, watching Gaudikovsky, and another thing, because of my background as being more dynamic player, I absolutely do not steer the position into positional realms. Like I really enjoy attacking play and dynamic play, and so I could, of course, try to play that way, more positional and quiet. In fact, when I started to come back, that's exactly what I thought I needed to do. I was like, older players are better when they play Isolani positions and positions where there's some positional advantage that you eke over to the end game, and that's what I need to do. And I learned after a period of time that wasn't that being older didn't magically give me those skills. Right. I actually hadn't learned anything during the 17 periods I hadn't been playing, and so I needed to do some sort of hybrid approach. But so I've always played dynamically. I still play dynamically. And my calculation isn't as good as it was when I was younger. I know that, but it's good enough. And especially when I have done a lot of homework to get sort of like the ideas of what to look at, what to start with, what kinds of plans are going to work. That's made an enormous difference because I'm not looking at everything. I'm looking at a smaller set of plans. Now they have to be sufficient, right? You can't just have one narrow idea of what to do in a given position. There has to be a few. It has to be that you can choose from. But so part of it is personal, and part of it is that I feel that intuition, and that's one of the things I feel like intuition is undersold by a lot of strong players who have already done the work to get this library of plans available to them. And at that point, it really is all about calculation. Once everybody's playing with the same deck of cards, right? It is about calculation and getting better at that, even if that's difficult at a certain point in time, which it may or may not be. Like I haven't done as much work on my calculation simply because I started out, that was almost my only strength. Was that and understanding sort of initiative and attacking positions and how to play those. So part of it is personal, but part of it is that I do believe that stronger players already have done a lot of the work to give them strong intuition in a lot of different positions. And so it's kind of underestimated, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's an important point. And actually, Grandmaster Matthew Sadler gave a generous review to my book in New in Chess magazine. But funny enough, his one critique of it that I thought was totally valid was that I talk about all these tenets of chess improvement, but I didn't emphasize intuition that much. And he, looking at it from the Grandmaster perspective, felt that it needed to be in there somewhere. Now, I do talk about pattern recognition and calculation in terms of building skills. And I would say that some sort of basic tactical pattern recognition, as I talk about in the book, checkmate patterns manual, et cetera, that goes into it, intuition. But the approach that you're discussing of bringing it beyond that, especially with regard to opening common ideas and stuff like that, is something I could have emphasized more. And does get sort of skipped over in the discourse somewhat. And it's funny because Hans Schuh, who submitted the question, is a Chessable author, and his courses, actually, one thing I like about them is that they have key positions. So, like, for example, he has a course on the Dubov Italian that I really like, and he says, memorize these four positions as sort of like your lighthouses, where like you don't know exactly what's going, because it's a very dynamic opening. But if you can just remember those four positions, you can sort of know the ideas of those positions and maybe try to navigate your way to those positions. So Han does know this well, but I think that, yeah, part of why, as you say, he there might be some disagreement or questioning is because your approach was based specifically on an appraisal of your own game, whereas he's more looking at it sort of whole cloth for adult players. But one other thing is I do think it's valid that it's easier to improve these things than to improve calculation skills, no matter your level. So it's worth keeping an eye on. But as always, the most important thing is what the results of your games tell you.
Yeah, and I do feel that intuition. I mean, part of it is watching strong players that are older. A lot of times they are intuitive players. Obviously, they're not just calculation monsters, right? But that's tends to be a younger player that looks that way. But like intuition and having a good idea of what the struggle looks like in this position, what kinds of things you should be looking at is I feel like really important and not focused on nearly as much as some of the other stuff in chess improvement literature.
Yeah, I agree. All right, well, Matt, let's dig into the actual OTB return. So you looked like your first tournament back, correct me if I'm wrong, was the World Open.
Yeah.
Dove into the deep end once you came back.
Yeah.
What surprised you the most coming to a tournament for the first time in 15 years or whatever it was?
Yeah, 17 years. It was, I played in the World Cup. I started working on it in late 2020. Started working on things, made an opening repertoire that I thought would be useful and worked on it. And I kind of didn't know what I was doing at that point and didn't, was doing my best. But I would say that the difference between studying and playing online and then playing in person, the biggest single difference was time management. And I did a terrible job of that. And then also, I had been doing a lot of opening work, but I hadn't done nearly enough work on the end game. So I didn't really have an idea of, once it got to a certain point, I was still just using whatever knowledge I had intrinsically, which wasn't that much about the end game. And so I played the end game pretty badly in a bunch of these, but ended up kind of stabilizing it out. The Scotch, I knew the Scotch really well, and I played it a lot. It saved me because, you get very tactical, very complex positions that are kind of unique to the Scotch.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
And so I was able to play reasonably well against strong players in that. But yeah, it was rough. Basically immediately became clear that this was not, at first I was like, oh, playing this tournament, I'll do some work. I've got, 60 rating points to get. I'll do some work. I'll do well in this, in one or two tournaments, and it'll be fine. And after that tournament, it was very clear that was not going to be the path. I was going to have to work a lot harder.
But you only lost 5 points. To me, that's a huge achievement.
I know. It was, and like I said, it was because certain types of positions. So I lost my first three games, and mostly because the openings are fine, but except one where I just forgot. I just was like, oh, I just completely forgot the move here. And but yeah, after that, it was again some positions that I knew and that my opponent didn't, and and also I've become a little less ambitious, right? I was no longer just trying to I was just trying to stabilize. And so looking for drawish lines or trying to, even against, someone who's 2,200 or something like that was fine. And so I did fine. Again, every time the Scotch got on the board, I got a good position out of the opening.
And from an energy management perspective, what did it feel like to be playing 2 games a day at times?
Yeah, that was, the biggest thing was just after the first day and a half, I'd lost 3 games, and I was like, oh, maybe I should just go home, just stop doing this. So it was, it was okay. From an energy management perspective, I knew what I was getting into. I had made sure that I had, rested a lot and that I was keeping myself. When I was younger, my tournaments were very, very energy intensive. I, would spend a lot on. So I knew that it was a big deal and that it was really going to be hard. And it was, but it wasn't any harder than it had been before.
Okay. And then eventually looking at your tournament history, it looks like you've transitioned more towards like weekly club games, primarily at the Lehigh Valley Chess Club. How did you settle on that routine?
Well, that was that was really a big piece of what made it doable. Because that there, I mean, I just randomly, like, after that tournament in the World Open, I was like, okay, I need to do a lot of work. And so it was over a year of working again every day, spending time. And some
Like how
days,
many hours a day, or how much time per day?
at least half an hour. Most days, I would say an average of maybe an hour, and then the weekends more like 2 or 3 hours. But every day, that was the commitment. Every day, I'm going to work on this. And so I was working on for a year and a couple months before I played in my second tournament. And at that point, it was just like, we're doing a lot of work. I should just go. I know there's a local quads. Like, I'll go to that. And I did. And I thought that it might just be like 1900 players, or like, it wasn't, which would be really hard to make master plan. But there were a couple masters that came, and that always came. And that really made the difference, because I could get really pretty good games against, 2250, 2300 level players every week. So yeah, I did pretty well that first quad, and I was like, okay, I can do it here. I think I played in Princeton. There was a like national chess congress that I played in, but otherwise, and I played in the World Open again. But otherwise, it was all just those quads I would go to at least once a month to play in, and usually playing masters at least 2 out of 3 games.
Yeah, and these are seasoned. I was just pulling up one of them, like Peter Meunier, who Todd Bryant has mentioned as one of the biggest improvers. Like, he went from 2000 to 2400 in his 20s, and has been playing the whole time. Like Mitch Fishbein, who's young, up and coming, and already in NM. So, and Matt Grosso also improved a lot in as an adult. So it's a tough competition to play regularly. And the other thing is, this format is 3 games in a day, faster time control. What is it, game 45?
It's game 40. I think it's delay 5.
Okay. So you mentioned time trouble when you came back to the World Open, then this is accelerated. So how did you manage to
that was the biggest problem. In fact, that was because I could play masters regularly, like locally, and that was good. But the problem was that it was faster time control, which was not as good. Although the fact that I'd spent so much time learning openings really well and learning positions, like, helped, because when I was younger, I didn't know openings that well. I was just calculating everything, like, from the opening. But here I could rely on my memory for chunks and for a lot of it. So it was easier to play faster. But that said, I've never been a great blitz player, and it was a problem. It was managing my time effectively. But you got to give something.
So did you anything you picked up that you could share that like helped you improve at it?
So yeah, one of my first, I think the third time I went, I lost on time in a winning position against a younger master player. That was one of the most painful ones. So that was basically, it was recognizing, I used to I need to spend the time. I need to spend a lot of time on every move and make sure. And it was just like, no, you have a certain amount. And in fact, I've done a lot of research on time management now, because I think it's something that's underrepresented in the chess literature. It's sort of optimal time management. But basically, I needed to make sure I had a minimum amount of time for every move. So for 40 minutes for the whole game, for, like delay 5 with let's say you estimate that the game's going to take about 80 moves. That means you have only a certain amount. And I was like, I need at least 2 minutes for every move, or at least to allocate it. Maybe I can short it if it's an easy move. I don't need to make it. So you
mean 2 minutes in reserve at least?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's so.
Because obviously you can't spend 2 minutes.
You can't spend 2 minutes on every move, but you need to know that you have some time available. You need to know what the time is available if you were to spend 2 minutes. And so it's you just know what your budget is. Okay, if I'm going to reserve this amount of time, and I'm never going to get into the increment, because that's one thing my research on time management, it became clear that like the sort of blunder rate really spikes, like below about 2 seconds. But even at 6 seconds, it's way higher than it is at like 15 seconds. So if you don't want to get into this case, it was a 5-second delay. I do not want to be playing on the delay. If you're playing on the delay, you're dropping like 200, 300 rating points in terms of the quality of play. So do not get into the delay. So how much time do I have to avoid the delay, to have this amount of time available to me? And I've got a budget, and I've got a budget for the opening. I've got a budget for the middle game, and you can spend more time or less time, but you got to know what your budget is, just like the monetary budget.
Yeah, well said. And this, of course, this is a lot of what my Chessable course is about, because I've dealt with the same struggles. But Matt, I came to a different conclusion than you. And it's funny because I give the advice which I discovered in Naroditsky. I've mentioned this before, but he has a great series of columns giving advice for blitz chess that he wrote when he was like a teenager, because he's Naroditsky and that's what he does. But he advises to never spend more than 10% on a move. Which I echo in identifying critical moments in chess, my Chessable course. And I think so. It sounds like you're in that ballpark with your 2-minute framework. But my question, Matt, because my solution to this was like, I eventually just decided, look, I can't play these game 30s, game 45s. For me, classical chess, budgeting your time in classical chess is hard enough, and I've gotten better at that. But in 30 to 45 minutes, like, there are these moments where you just find a position interesting, and they come as early as the opening. So how do you force yourself to move? You have some new wrinkle, some unknown position. Is it hard to get yourself to just pick a move and make it?
I mean, you have to, right? Like, and that's, there's a certain, if you're at your budget, right? I mean, like, you can allocate, you say, I have a certain amount of budget. I can spend money on, spend time on this position. And I will, but at a certain point in time, like, you have to move. Even if, and so what I usually do there is, when I can see that I'm going to need to spend time on it, identify what the candidate moves I'm going to look at early. I mean, like, you can of course revise that deep in some position, you see some idea and they're like, wait, this applies back in the original position. But for the most part, I'm like, okay, these are the candidates. I'm going to make one of these 3 moves. And I make sure I've got one that is minimally okay, right? I make sure, okay, like this one, I think it's pretty safe. I'm going to make sure that this mostly works. And so I look at that one, make sure that it does. And then I can spend gobs of time on the other candidate moves. Maybe they're better, and always going back to this one. And if I can't make one of these others work, I'm just going to play the first one.
But gobs of time is 2 minutes, right?
Yeah, I know. It's like, you have to, and I know it's not my favorite time control.
But you made it work. I mean, you didn't run away from it like I did.
Well, I mean, you have to, I mean, that part of it was, I knew I needed to play. I needed to play a lot. And I couldn't just play in big tournaments every 3 or 4 months, because you're not just not getting enough games in.
Yeah. And Matt, so obviously Kamsky had a big imprint, especially from your discovering him earlier. Do you have other favorite content creators or books that have helped you along the way?
Yeah, I mean, well, I had from when I was younger, I have a huge library of books and so I was, John Nunn is a great author. And game collections are some of my favorites. Like Fire on Board. Yeah, that's a fun one. There's the classic book by Bronstein on the Zurich International. Always playing through games that are well annotated. That's one of the things I really always enjoyed doing. But since I've come back, I still like watching Matakonsky. Although, anyway, the games are great. Sometimes the commentary is a little mixed, but the games are fantastic. I mean, Hikaru Nakamura is so much fun to watch. But I think I like the Chess Dojo guys the most, second to Konsky.
They're great. Shout out to the dojo as always. And do you, in terms of their videos, like I always, as I've mentioned a million times, like I like their postmortems. I like to relive the struggles of obviously Jesse and Kostya compete more than David. But do you have a favorite type of content that they do?
Yeah, I mean, like no engine analysis. Because that's almost my favorite thing to do with respect to chess is just analyze, especially analyze as part of a group. Like that's just so much fun and thinking about things. And the engine kind of, I mean, obviously makes the quality analysis better, but it makes the activity less fun because then you just, it's like, if you invite one super GM to the room and then his opinion just becomes the opinion. So that's what the engine is doing. And so just doing it, like analyzing, that's my favorite stuff.
Yeah. And in terms of, so you mentioned in your blog, you get a lot of your feedback and draw a lot of your conclusions from online play.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's sort of your lab. And then you go out in the world and play OTB.
Mm-hmm.
What is your preferred time control for online? And are you able to take it seriously enough where you feel like you're gaining from it?
Yeah. I mean, it really depends on what I'm trying to do. I would say that my favorite time control for playing and exercising the sample game is rapid. I mean, it needs to be part of it is I don't have that much time, right? I have a full-time job. I have a lot of family responsibilities. Like I have basically about an hour a day to work on it. And so if I'm playing, rapid games, like that's maybe two that I'm playing. So a lot of times I'm trying to assess. I'm trying to say, okay, where am I comfortable? Where am I not comfortable? What do I need to work on? And so I want a lot of games and so Blitz and even Bullet. Like I never play Bullet. 2-1 is the fastest I ever go. That's I can't anything less than that is ridiculous for me. But I play a fair amount of 2-1 and just to get a lot of games in and assess. Okay, it was soft here. I didn't really know what I was doing here. I didn't really have a strong plan here and an idea. So then I say, okay, like goes in the library of positions that I need to work on. So Blitz and Bullet for assessment and self-measurement, but then Rapid for actually trying to practice use the muscles that I'm going to use in OTB.
Okay. So if you're spending an hour a day playing on a Saturday, maybe a couple times a month, like what percentage of your time is spent? You've got the actual play online, and then how much time are you spending reviewing both your OTB games and online?
Well, I mean, the review is the work. So I would say that I'm spending maybe because playing is also like fun, and I would say that I spend about half and half on play and then work, unless my play, like I've seen a lot of things. I know I have a lot of things that I need to work on, and then sometimes it's all work. I don't do any play at all.
And do you have it mapped out, like a leg day and an arm day at the gym, or is it like you just sit down and see what you feel like doing?
Yeah, it depends. So again, like I've got kind of a list of things that I've encountered that are problems that I need to work on, working on rook endings of a certain type, or working on Carlsbad middle games, like where I messed up and didn't do a good job. So I have some lists, and I can see the list getting longer. I mean, every game where I usually goes in something, even the ones I win, right? It's like, well, I won, but I had a problem here. And so I can see the list getting longer. And when it gets to a certain length, then I'm like, okay, you need to clean these out and start working on them. And so and then hopefully they get lists, and then basically my list, I gray them out. So I have a list of links with games to them, and then with a particular problem. And when I've worked on them, then I gray them out. But then I can see when I add new ones to it, that's when it's okay, you work on this again. But some of them, I solved that problem mostly, right? It's not as much of a problem.
I feel like my list would only get longer.
So that's why you have to spend days just working, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so you came back, you set this goal. It took you longer than you thought. But as you say on your blog, we don't know of anyone else who's made it to master at USCF Master at a more advanced age, even though 40, 47, 48 is not that old, as I tell myself. So how did it feel when you made it? Was it anticlimactic or no?
It was, I mean, I've been working. I mean, part of it is that, so it was fantastic.
Okay.
It was I mean, I was working at it for 3 years, right? And part of it, I was
Right.
working at it and not ever really knowing if I would make it, right? Because I was like, every day I'm getting older, right? Like it's like, I don't know whether I'm going to make it. It's not a guarantee that I'm going to make it. And, there was a feeling of like when I would get close and then fall back. And then there was this last World Open that I played in, like I hung a bishop, like in time trouble against like a 1900 player. And like, you lose, I don't know how many points, a lot of points when I was rated like, I think it was rated like 2190 at the moment. Then like, that was extremely painful. So it was like this feeling like I might never make it and I need to keep working every day. And even if I might never make it. And so when I made it, it was like, there is no version of my life where I didn't make Master.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it doesn't matter if I fall back the next time, right? But I made it. I'm getting a certificate. I can frame it. It's on my wall over there. And that was knowing that I had achieved this thing that was hard, that I knew was going to be hard, it still gives me a feeling, a positive feeling in my stomach to know that I did this thing that was difficult.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thanks.
And you did mention to me, we chatted briefly last week, that now it's like, what's next? It's the classic dilemma.
Well, you've noted that I have a lot of stuff on my blog. I mean, like,
it's amazing. Yeah. It's so much.
And you can see like that time that I was spending every day. Part of it was like, okay, what do I want to do? I wanted to make Master. I did make Master. I played in a couple quad tournaments after that, but like, motivation wasn't the same, right? It was like, what am I am I trying to make 2,300? Like, am I trying to do more? Like, what am I trying to do here? And I decided that what I really wanted to do was to share, and that was part of what gave me joy, was talking. In fact, that was one of the things that was hard for me. Like, there was this community in Eastern Pennsylvania, and local quads, same people over and over again, and they'd go to the diner afterwards to analyze games, like friends, people I enjoyed, like, and I couldn't share all my opening stuff because they could use it, right? Like they could,
right?
Like,
yeah.
I was playing them every week. So at a certain point, I was like, I just want to be an open book. I want to share everything, because two things. First of all, is that when I myself was coming back, like, I felt like there were things that I needed to know that I had to learn myself. Like, at least for me, right, for improving, for doing this, like, I didn't have this anywhere, and I wanted to make it so that other people had access to what I had learned and experienced. And the other thing is that I just wanted to, I really enjoy sharing. I enjoy writing, and I wanted to focus on that. So I learned how to build a website and coded it myself, and then started putting in content, things that I myself would have wanted to read.
Yeah. And we should say, it's not just like think pieces. It's like free resources, like opening repertoire
Again,
files.
open book. Like, I'm not trying to make a rating goal now. I'm just trying to enjoy the game and have a community.
Awesome. And just a couple more questions, Matt. So one, as you mentioned, it's a small community. Now, obviously, sometimes in these sort of round robin events, a player might know in advance what color they have against a certain player and be able to make an opening decision based on that. You playing in quads, it's slightly different, because there's a high probability you're going to play certain people over and over again, but you don't know what color, and I don't know how much their repertoires bounce around. So how much do you tailor your repertoire to like opponents that are more probable?
Yeah. I mean, when I was trying to make Master and playing, Matt O'Brien and Peter Minier, like, every time,
right?
Like, sometimes Michael Romero was coming, but anyway, I had specific lines that I knew were likely to come up that I was preparing fairly deeply, and it didn't always work. I mean, Peter plays a lot of like that, so let's call them like not ambitious openings,
Right.
just trying to get to a good middle game, and he plays a lot of them. So it's even preparing for them, it's hard to really get a concrete advantage. Matthew plays a lot of stuff too, but he tends to be more ambitious, and so had some more success preparing against him specifically. But it's, I can't not, right? When you know you're playing the same people over and over again, then you're trying to do well.
Okay. And then last question. So obviously you're a strong player, stronger than most of the people that will be listening to this. But for people rated below 1800, based on your experiences, like what improvement advice would you give? Because you had a fairly advanced challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that all of the improvement that I've ever made has been mostly based on ingesting good patterns. And that's whether that's playing over the games of strong players that I wanted to emulate, and really not just playing it over, really thinking about each move and what you would play and then seeing what they play. Right? I would say that generally, if you're going to do one thing, it's that. Like, play through the games of strong players whose play you want to emulate. Play them over seriously. Trying to guess each move. Think about it, and because you need to expose yourself to good patterns, right? Like it's hard to, in the blog I talked about, like trying to learn French by having like a French and English dictionary and just using it is really hard versus spending time with people who speak French, right? And then seeing how it's actually used is much easier and much better. And that's really what I would advise.
Excellent. Okay, well, Matt's blog is called movelibrary.com. So you said you're trying to post every 2 weeks is your
at
goal?
least every 2 weeks is the goal.
Yeah, and like I said, a lot of work goes into it, and it's all free. So thank you for that contribution, Matt.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Cool. Well, anything else you want to mention before we say our goodbyes?
No, just for everybody who's trying to improve, stick with it and commit to it, and it's worth it.
Excellent. And people can reach you through the blog, I assume.
Absolutely.
Right?
There's a contact us that gets right to me.
All right. Well, thank you again, and congratulations, Matt.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.